Right, so welcome Dr. Andrea Pennington to Keen on Yoga Chats. Thanks for agreeing to come on. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's wonderful to see you. And I don't really know where to start. You've done so much with your life. But I suppose, my wife asked me yesterday, what are you a doctor of? Because most people are doctors, and they, you kind of assume that, but you are actually a medical doctor as well as everything else, So do you want to just walk me through your training and your early years before you came into the current incarnation that you are now?
Yes, there have been multiple incarnations.
Yeah.
Well, I started off as a performing artist as a child all the way through university. And in my university years, because my mother was also a physician, I kind of wanted to follow in her footsteps. So I did pre-med. I went to medical school in the United States, and my first career in medicine was pediatrics. And then I quickly shifted to adult medicine when I started treating eating disorders and addiction. And then I got certified in age management and hormone optimization, and did that for several years, and then started seeing that the same challenges around addiction and eating disorders were coming up with like major superstars and executives who went into burnout. And that led me to really focus on trauma recovery and self-love, which is where I'm focused now. And it's been a very windy road, including now I'm doing psychedelic assisted therapy and so many things. Yeah.
How's that?
It's wonderful.
Right.
To be honest, it was coming into the path of psychedelics with MDMA and then ayahuasca for myself, for my own healing journey. I kept it private for several years, but as I have progressed in my journeys, and after sitting with psilocybin or magic mushrooms, I really got a strong calling to facilitate healing with other people, especially people in the BIPOC community.
Yeah, we used to do that when we were young, but in a less structured way, I think. So, I suppose the obvious question is, what led you first of all to break away from medicine? And and when you said there's this real schism I noticed with you, or with creativity and a steady scientific job, background, career, and I think that comes from your upbringing, and you mentioned many times in other podcasts and episodes, chats with people, your father and his ideas about creativity and money earning, etc. So maybe just speak on that for a second.
Yeah, so I basically have lived two parallel lives in this one body. I think I naturally am a performer and a teacher. I love it. My mother, fortunately, encouraged that. I was playing piano. She always came to my events and recitals. But my father, as you mentioned, was very heavy on education. And he felt like the safe route for his children was to focus on education and not the arts. Now, to his credit, he had grown up in Tennessee, lived in Reno, Nevada, and seen a lot of big acts come into town. And he realized that to make it in entertainment, it's like 1 in a million. So, he was a young father. He wanted to keep us safe. So he pushed us towards education. And for me, I know that I have always been an artist. So I was able to do that alongside with pre-med as long as my grades were good, which created a whole sense of perfectionism that we'll talk about another time. But yeah, he had a strong influence in that. And early in my career, I felt like I had to focus on medicine. And of course I did. When I got to medical school, it was really hard and really competitive. But I started noticing that every time I wanted to do something creative, I would have this like internal fear, like, no, that's not safe. And it really created, like you said, a schism. There was this sense of warfare going on internally, my soul wanting to just express and explore. And then this ego that's like, no, we need to stay safe.
But he was actually a performer himself, wasn't he? A musician, like a talented. So he wasn't like, he wasn't interested in the arts and creativeness. You have that in your background.
Exactly.
Yeah. Which is interesting. I mean, and what happened at the university? You mentioned the perfectionism. You mentioned, I mean, I liked the joke about the degrees and the thermometer. She's got more degrees than the thermometer. You are like an incredible achiever, but at a point in university, I think that it started to all catch up with you.
Yeah, it's not university. Actually, when I was in med school was when it really got to me. Because it's different in the UK the way university and med school is combined. They
go together. Yes. You do part of it.
For us in America, you do 4 years university, and then you go to specialty school. So it was that for me when I got to medical school, and I was just sort of a one-track mind, only focused on my studies. I started to feel depression. And it's interesting because even though I was originally prescribed antidepressant medications, the doctor who prescribed them remembered me from my interviews when I did my med school interviews. And she was like, wait a minute, aren't you the one that has like classical piano in your background? How often are you playing piano? And I was like, I'm not playing piano at all. All I can do is study. And she was like, well, why don't you play for like 30 minutes a day? And even that, I was like, what? I can't do 30 minutes a day. She's like, okay, 30 minutes a week. And I wish I had caught on then to understand that for me, my greatest antidepressant is music, it's exploration, it's expression. But it was after I completed medical school, I was working for Discovery Channel, I was doing a lot of creative things, but then the next piece of me that came forward was this spiritual seeker and teacher. And I was discovering that there was a lot of information coming out, like major NIH studies about mindfulness meditation helping with pain, addiction, heart problems. And at the time, as the medical director at Discovery Health Channel, I was hosting the news and documentaries. And I wanted to bring over this information, but they were not ready. They were way too conservative. Mm-hmm. And for me, I felt like, I'm on television all around America. And if I can't tell people the whole truth, it was creating, again, this sense of angst and frustration within me. Because one of my highest values is integrity. It's wholeness, it's alignment. So that's when I really started to feel like, okay, I'm not being true to myself. And I'm not being true in my expression. And that created a lot of anxiety.
And this was after you were working in trauma units, right?
Well, at that point, yes, I had just started the wellness center with my mom, and I wasn't working in like trauma as in car accident trauma. I was working in emotional trauma. And in our wellness center, we were helping people with addiction and eating disorders, and many of them did have, significant traumas in their background.
And did you feel that the medicine was lacking in its approach, or I suppose what I'm trying to say is, how did you shift out of medicine towards your current inclination, and what's good in the medicine that you use now, and what have you brought to it or amended?
Well, the shift, I'm sorry, I didn't follow your train of thought originally, but the shift came for me in my 4th year of medical school.
Right.
My mother, as I mentioned, was already a physician, and she was learning acupuncture for drug and alcohol detox as part of her work as the medical director for the Georgia Mental Health Institute. So she was telling me on the phone that people were detoxing, like from opioids, from cocaine, like serious stuff, with just these little ear acupuncture needles.
Incredible.
And I was like, that's not possible, Mom. Like, I had just done my psych rotation. I'd seen people, and we've all seen the movies. People are a mess physiologically when they're with
I was a
drugs.
nurse for a while, so I've seen it.
Yeah, it's not pretty.
They're the worst. You think they're dying. You say, what's wrong with this person? You come in and they say, oh, they're just detoxing. You think they're on their last legs.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So to hear that my mother was detoxing patients as outpatients, they weren't even in the hospital. They weren't hooked up to an IV. And I got home and visited her, and I said, okay, I want you to give me the same treatment. I wasn't addicted to drugs or anything, but I was curious. And I had, you'll appreciate this as a yogi, I had that same rush of this kundalini, this flush on my face and tears just streaming down my cheeks. And I was like, what is this? So in my 4th year of medical school, I convinced the dean to let me go to New York and study with Dr. Michael Smith, who at the time was a pioneer in bringing acupuncture to the West, specifically for drug and alcohol detox. And so even when I graduated, I already had this sort of awakening that there's more to the mind and the body than what they were teaching us in the traditional system. So when my mother and I opened the center together, we had acupuncture, we had behavior modification, we had psychiatry and psychology, as well as a holistic spa. So it was during those first couple of years that I realized we needed to integrate all of this together. Lifestyle management, stress management, dealing with our past programming, as well as, of course, taking care of the physical body as it stands, nutrition and fitness and sleep and hydration. And it was during that time that I could appreciate that when you're in a real emergency situation, Western medicine or allopathic medicine is great. There's some wonderful benefits.
Exactly. Yeah, you probably wouldn't use homeopathy if you're in a car crash. You know,
No.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there are, but I mean, it's big stuff. Right, for the emotional stuff, and for you need you don't need a sledgehammer,
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things that we can actually prevent and treat ourselves. Like the human body is amazing at self-healing. We each have an innate vitality code that will put the body into a healing and recovery phase if we stop blocking it. And so that's all of that sort of background. And then having practical experience with my patients is what led me to realize we have to live with this more holistic approach.
And I mean, you've spoken about having trauma. I mean, everyone's got trauma in their upbringing, right? Regardless of how, your parents sound well-wishing and great, but inevitably, maybe not, inevitably, one inherits trauma regardless. And how have you related to that? I mean, you're working with trauma a great deal now, childhood trauma, and what's the what is the biggest tools that you can say that will help people advance? Help people break out of these patterns. Because I mean, I was at university, fell into this same kind of depression. As a very high achiever, I'd always got I'd been given a place at Oxbridge, and and I didn't. I couldn't cope anymore, and so they put me in the talking therapy, they put me in the antidepressants, and nothing changed. Nothing changed, really. I was very good at talking my way out of things, until I found yoga, and that made the difference. So I'm wondering, what your real shift has been through working through your own traumas.
Wow, that's great. I'm happy that you found yoga. Right?
Yeah, it was bloody lucky, actually.
Yeah.
It wasn't going well before that with antidepressants and the alcohol and the drugs. Yeah, it wasn't pretty. Yeah.
Yeah, I get that. I get that on so many levels. Yeah. Well, yes, we all live with trauma, big T trauma, as in physical or sexual abuse or witnessing something really devastating.
Yeah.
To the minor everyday traumas. And what I didn't realize is how much my family background impacted me. So yes, my parents were indeed very well-wishing and well-intentioned, but each of them brought to their marriage a lot of baggage and emotional wounding. My mother lost my grandmother when my mom was just 11 years old.
Right.
She never fully healed from that wound. She was also rejected by her father. My father was the child of an alcoholic, and nobody talked about it. And all of those sort of traumatic experiences were transmitted to their children. And my parents got divorced when I was 3, and I never thought that was a big deal because I saw so many other families in our neighborhood where the parents were divorced. But what I now know is based on the research done with the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences, if you happen to grow up in a family where before the age of 18, there was a physical or sexual abuse, there was poverty, if there was a divorce or loss of a parent, perhaps due to death or to suicide, and a whole host of things, that all of those, even though they may seem like trivial traumas, they impact our brain, our nervous system, our cardiovascular system, and our immune system. And so it was as I was hearing my patients we had some of the same symptoms. I felt the same sense of depression and not enoughness and unsatisfactoriness, but I didn't have the major traumas that they did. But when I really started to uncover, like, we all had this profound feeling that we were not good enough, that we were unlovable. And it was that really led me to do my own work. And so when you ask, what does anyone do who has any sort of trauma, big or small, we always start with self-awareness, like really looking at your family history from what might have genetically been passed on, but also the environment that you grew up in. Did you have loving and responsive parents? And if not, how has that impacted you? Were there any attachment wounds with your primary caregivers? Because all of those set us up for compensating behaviors, perfectionism, overachiever, all of that sort of people pleaser, like all of those behavioral reactions come from our early life experiences. And if we don't look at them, self-awareness is about just looking at what is so, not blaming yourself or your parents. I mean, I don't blame them. I understand where they went wrong and why, and I have immense compassion. But I had to understand it for myself so that I could finally put it in its correct context, so that I wasn't any longer being a victim or always being this compulsive people pleaser. I had to get out of that codependent dance by just sitting with what was so and learning to accept, okay, that was then, this is now. I'm the conscious chooser of my life experience going forward.